America's loneliest woman soon got thousands of visitors for strange hobby.
But before we start, please make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell and smash that like button. We really appreciate your continuous support.
The further you go back in history, the more difficult it was for women to have any kind of independence. But ridiculous social conventions never stopped Dorothy Moulter of Knife Lake. For 56 years from her remote home in the Minnesota wilderness, she lived a hardy outdoor life and managed to draw in thousands of tourists with a unique hobby. Few could believe exactly what she was doing way out there. Doing it her way. Dorothy graduated from high school in 1927 and wasn't interested in following the limiting gender roles of her time. She went to nursing school in Chicago instead. These skills would serve her well in the future. Knife Lake. 3 years later, she took a vacation that would forever change the course of her life. She visited the extremely remote Isle of Pines in Knife Lake. Nestled deep within the Superior National Forest, the picturesque location isn't for the faint of heart. Wild country. Ely, Minnesota was the closest town, and it was 30 miles away, and it was a 15-mile canoe trip to the nearest road. As a Chicago resident, the area was alien to Dorothy, and she immediately fell in love. New directions. Back in the city, she tried to find nursing jobs, but was thwarted by the Great Depression. Eventually, Dorothy spent larger chunks of time on the Isles of Pine, staying in resort fishing camp managed by Bill Berglund. Changing hands. Bill noted Dorothy's passion for the resort and offered her a full-time job in 1934. For 14 years, she helped Bill run the camp, until his death. Bill left the Isle of Pines resort to Dorothy, and at 41, she became the new owner. Sweet solitude. Dorothy settled into her life of solitude, helping tourists in the summers and hunkering down in her cabin during the brutal winter months. Living in the middle of the woods may have seemed uneventful, but Dorothy always kept busy. Healing injuries. She spent a lot of time healing injured animals and tourists. From splintering broken limbs to removing embedded fish hooks, Dorothy's nursing degree was put to good use. Nightingale nurse. Her most thrilling first responder moment was treating a boy who was struck by lightning until a rescue plane flew him to a hospital. After this memorable feat, locals called her Nightingale of the Northwoods. Try me. Though she was an accomplished nurse and frontierswoman, people were most interested in the fact that she was an unmarried woman living in the woods. The only way she'd commit to marriage was if a man could portage heavier loads, chop more wood, or catch more fish. By herself. To successfully live on her island, Dorothy did it all by herself, chopping wood, gathering lake water, and harvesting ice. She never had electricity, a phone, or running water. We're not sure how she managed without those essentials. Preserving the forest. While Dorothy was living her wild life, the government was attempting to preserve the beautiful forest around her. Part of their efforts included banning float plane flights to the island, further isolating Dorothy. Loneliest woman in America. After the ban went through, the Saturday Evening Post profiled her, dubbing the islander the loneliest woman in America. In 1964, life became even more complicated for Dorothy. Island living. That was when the government passed Wilderness Act, banning homes, buildings, and businesses from Knife Lake and the woods around it. Dorothy ignored the law. She'd lived on the island for nearly 30 years at this point and had no plans to leave. You can stay. With the help of politicians and environmentalists, Dorothy eventually got permission to stay on the island. She was forced to shut down the resort, but that didn't stop her from engaging in her favorite hobby. Root beer. When tourists and locals stopped by during their canoeing trips, Dorothy had a special beverage for all of them. Root beer. She used to sell soda that was delivered by float plane and had to adjust once the plane stopped coming. It's all natural. Dorothy bought flavored syrup from Ely and a local Boy Scout base, mixing in yeast for carbonation, and lake water in an 8-gallon ceramic pot. She joked that she used a canoe paddle to stir the mixture to add a touch of pine flavor. Brewing party. Bottling was easy. Dorothy collected glass soda bottles and filled them with a root beer. Her family and friends would come over for bottling and brewing parties over the summer. They'd sometimes help with ice gathering too, but we're guessing this wasn't as enjoyable. Sneaky sneaky. To get around the Wilderness Act restrictions that concerned owning a business, she gave her brew to tourists in return for a donation. Even though the soda's taste wasn't always consistent, she sold thousands of bottles. The Root Beer Lady. Dorothy sold an average of 12,000 bottles a year. People were curious about the Root Beer Lady, living alone in the woods, and made sure to stop by during their canoe expeditions. Local Boy Scouts were some of her best customers. Not so lonely. In 1986, Dorothy died in her cabin, and a group of her passionate supporters, calling themselves Dorothy's Angels, opened a museum in Ely to honor the independent woman. She may have lived an isolated life, but she spent her time doing what she loved. Societal expectations be damned. More recently, her lifestyle inspired others to get off the grid, but with a key difference. Living along the Nowitna River. Some embrace the wilderness as a family. The ATCHLEYs are the only residents anywhere along the 250-mile stretch of the Nowitna River. Residential areas are far from this woodsy terrain, but living way out there was a life Romy always dreamed of. Secluded open space. Growing up, I was really interested in living off the land. The then 45-year-old Romy told Jenny Brocky, the host of SBS's Australian documentary program Insight, in 2018. I had this desire to have space around me and really think about life. The ATCHLEY children. David and Romy have 2 boys, Zach and Sky. Understandably, Zach moved to Fairbanks, Alaska when he was just 17 years old, as he craved civilization. Sky, who was 16 years old as of 2020, still lived with his parents. Life in isolation. While Zach clearly felt secluded and off the beaten track, his father never felt that way. I never considered myself as isolated. I knew we were remote, but for me it was about having the quiet and hearing my own mind without the noise of the town, said David. Far from civilization. Though David may not consider him and his family to be living in isolation, they live almost 100 miles from the nearest town, Ruby, which only has 160 residents. So, yeah, they're not exactly social butterflies. Unlikely hosts. Out of the nearly 20 years spent living in the thick of the Alaskan forest adjacent to the river, only a few people have visited the ATCHLEY's remote cabin, one being photographer Ed Gold, who documented their unique way of living via photographs for BBC. Annual trip to a capitalist society. But living purely off the land can only last so long, as the ATCHLEYs aren't ancient hunters in loincloths and fur capes. Once a year, they take one massive trip to the grocery store and stock up on necessities. Extreme grocery shopping. We buy everything for a year, and we buy all the supplies, and we box. They barge it down to Ruby for us, and it usually takes a couple of trips. But once it's here, you're good for the year, David explained. The extreme couponers are surely impressed. Content in nature. Sky doesn't seem to have the same mindset as his older brother did, who likely felt stranded, considering he's completely content with the fact that he's been homeschooled his entire life and doesn't plan on leaving the quietness of the Alaskan wilderness anytime soon. Teenage thoughts. A lot of other teenagers would probably think it's not cool to be around your parents, Sky explained via Skype. Yes, though they're disconnected from the rest of civilization, the ATCHLEYs did succumb to getting internet installed in October 2017. A strong bond. When you live this close to each other in the middle of the woods, and you've been here a long time, they're not just your parents, they're your best friends, because you're all alone with them, Sky continued. Rare engagement with peers. He's bonded with his parents in ways normal teenagers could never understand. Though Sky said he's happier here than I would be anywhere else, He estimates he only spends a week and a half in contact with peers over the internet each year, which is rough. Maturing quickly. The minuscule amount of interaction Sky has with people his own age throughout his life has forced him to mature with great speed. Growing up with my parents, sometimes kids seem a little childish, Sky admitted about his peers. Relating to youths. They care about things that aren't that important sometimes, he concluded. The fact of the matter is that Sky and his family live a very different life from most modern Americans. So it's no wonder that he can't relate to his peers in regards to minor, aka unimportant, issues. What the land has to offer. Remember when we said that the ATCHLEYs don't hunt wild animals in loincloths and fur capes? Well, this is still true. They do hunt for meat on the land, just minus the caveman ensemble, often pursuing black bears, wolves, rabbits, ducks, and beavers. Yum. Foraging for berries. The ATCHLEYs also traverse the Alaskan forest, which they call their backyard, to forage for lingonberries and rosehips to make their delicious homemade jam. I'm not very fond of the food in town, Sky hilariously said of his annual outings to restaurants. We guess there's nothing like Mom's cooking. From scratch. Sky followed that up by pondering about whether or not he has stronger than normal taste buds. When he, Sky, gets to town and wants a sandwich, for someone to hand him white bread, it doesn't seem like bread to him after eating homemade whole wheat, explained Romy. Yearly expenses. Amazingly, living off the land and using solar power cost the family just $12,000 annually. Life without materialistic clutter is pretty darn cheap. David is the family's breadwinner, making moolah by selling tanned hides, building log cabins, or working in a nearby gold mine. First aid. When it comes to medical needs, the ATCHLEYs rely on various books on medicine and first aid kits they keep on hand. Overall, they've learned to deal with health-related issues as they've come. But in the case of a real emergency, David said they'd have to call in a light aircraft for help. Dealing with fears. It's pretty intense out here in general, but you learn how to put it in the back of your mind and only deal with what's happening instead of the fears of what could happen, David relayed. Though he was initially referring to health-related affairs, he then went into emotional complexities. Creating your own reality. When you're isolated like this with each other, your relationship is everything, David explained. During the decades of living out here, you spend a lot of time working on your relationship because in isolation, you truly create your own reality, he said. Positive actions. When you have the ability to make your wife slump or make her smile, what are you going to choose? That makes the rules for us, David continued. We're all just trying to get along and we all love each other. That's a mentality we could all benefit from, no matter what lifestyle we adopt. Minimalistic living. We could imagine the mental, physical, and emotional challenges that come with living off the grid and seeing the same few faces every single day, even if you love those faces. But the Ruiz family might know a thing or two about said challenges. Minimalistic living in the midst of Mother Nature's gifts ain't always easy. During the blissful honeymoon phase of their marriage, Zach and Katie Ruiz resided in a quaint California apartment. While waking up to the warmth of the Golden State every day sounds like a dream, cutesy Cali living came at a price. With no real plan in mind, Zach and a pregnant Katie went back to Katie's hometown in New Mexico as they needed to save some dough. After living there for about a year, Katie's mother relayed some surprising, not to mention convenient news. Lo and behold, Katie had unknowingly inherited an acre of land. As you could only imagine, the couple with a second baby on the way was practically jumping for joy. Money was tight, and this seemed to be the answer to their prayers. Zach and Katie were eager to move on to their newly obtained property, as they wanted to break the exhausting cycle of simply working to pay their rent and living paycheck to paycheck. They knew where they were going to live, but not what they'd live in. After perusing the internet for housing options, hoping to build cheaply their dream home on Katie's acre, they found the available options would strip their wallets dry. They birthed a unique idea, however. The Ruiz family decided to live in a tent. Yes, a tent. After getting situated in a lousy camper for a few months while on the property, they transitioned to tent living. But don't cringe just yet. They took glamping to a whole new level. Within an 8-week period, Zach, who makes handcrafted lighting and decor, and Katie, who sells various essential oil products, built a 300 square foot tent, complete with a cozy raised loft. Though it's compact, the homey tent featured only what the family of four needed. That's $1,500 a month we don't have to spend, Zach said, regarding their brilliant escape from the dreaded monthly rent bill. Raising a family comes with its sacrifices, and while you'd think giving up a house would be a huge sacrifice, it wasn't for the Ruiz family at first. Their sleeping area, kitchen, and dining area were all visible from the aesthetically pleasing glass front, which obviously made for a cramped lifestyle. The Ruiz family made it work, though. The whole hipster Brooklyn coffee shop vibe, which included rustic artwork, pastoral wood, and various houseplants, made the lack of elbow room more than bearable for the fam. Although it was homey, tent life did come with its downfalls. The loft, which was dripping in fairy lights, was accessible via a ladder for the kiddies. Though it was technically the kids' bedroom, they often slept in their parents' bed due to temperature issues. The tent didn't exactly get central heating. It was especially a problem in the winter, as the family not only slept in the same bed to bask in their communal body heat, but they also frequently wore coats and sweats inside the tent. That sounds like it would get pretty old pretty quick. Most people probably couldn't deal. I always joke. People like nature until nature kicks in, Zach said of the uncomfortable temperatures the Ruiz family endured. Still, there was more nature to deal with than the cold. Unfortunately, there was no running water anywhere in the tent, which may be the final deal breaker for some. So that made certain aqua-related chores a bit of a hassle. The family had an industrial-style outdoor shower, though. Washing dishes isn't the easiest thing, but it's still really doable. It maybe just takes a few minutes longer here and there, Zach said. It was all give and take. In the Grand Ruiz tent, you'd also find a 4-foot by 8-foot closet, a 4-foot by 3-foot bathroom with a composting toilet. They were only concerned with the tent serving the most fundamental of needs. There was no fluff in this woodsy paradise. Since minimalism was important to Zach and Katie, they found little ways to create space without cluttering the teeny-weeny tent. Their king-size bed sat on an elevated platform, which provided room underneath just perfect for storage. They also kept their energy usage to a minimum, which was why the solar panels worked wonder. Said panels fueled LED lights, a television, a DVD player, phone chargers, a small fridge, and an electric stovetop. Our daily power needs are pretty small, Zach said. Zach relayed that he gained a ton of free time since the start of the family's downsized tent lifestyle. Time to do whatever I want. Time to hang out with the boys. Time to have hobbies and actually do them, he said. The Ruiz family's tent was even featured in Brent Heavener's book, Tiny House, which details the ins and outs of tiny living. Though their 2-year-old tiny tent was famous, they weren't planning to be there forever. The family was in love with tiny living, which Brent Heavener believed aids in your pursuit of freedom. But Zach explained that a 600 square foot cabin would be perfect for the squad, and that they were planning to move out of the sacred tent in a few years. We evolved our mindset of working with less, Zach explained. Living a simplistic life in a 300 square foot tent birthed a minimalistic renaissance for the Ruiz family. A life without unnecessary clutter not only saved the Ruiz clan wads of cash, but it created a sense of enlightenment and fulfillment within the family. Tiny living ain't easy, but Zach and Katie are just one of many couples who took the plunge into this eccentric, money-saving lifestyle. Curtis O'Rourke Stedman and Kelly were also plagued by money problems and turned to tiny homes to help. Curtis and his partner Kelly had the itch to see the rest of the lower 48 states. A couple of nature buffs and travel junkies, they grew restless in their admittedly beautiful home in Juneau, Alaska. As an English teacher, Curtis was stuck in his location to earn a living. But day after day, his mind would drift while writing on the whiteboard. He fantasized about turning his passion project into a full-time gig. During the week, he was all business. It was, please take the hall pass when using the restroom, and where's your homework? But once the bell rang on Friday, Mr. O'Rourke Stedman disappeared. In his place was the folk Americana crooner, Cousin Curtis. Taking his music career full-time was looming larger in Curtis's mind. Together, he and Kelly came to a decision. The window of opportunity to uproot their lives, travel the states, and give his music a shot was ajar, and they didn't know how long it would stay open. As luck would have it, Kelly was wrapping up her graduate program in early childhood special education. Before she hunkered down and started searching for her eventual career in social services, she wanted to pursue their dream. It was the perfect time to take off and explore. Since they had history as travel companions, Curtis and Kelly knew their relationship could withstand the tension of life on the road. The couple actually cemented their romance over the week-long drive from their home state of Michigan to Alaska. But one big obstacle stood in the way: money. Puttering around in different places would require a place to stay, and the idea of a small fortune spent on hotel fees was unrealistic. They had to find a solution. It was just too big of a leap to continue to pay rent and then hope we had enough money to cover these other expenses, Kelly said. After looking at their goal from several different angles, the best avenue was to exit their current residence and create a transportable tiny house. A payment of $4,750 brought them to their new crash pad. Well, the bare bones of it anyway. It was a blank canvas of a space that required a healthy dose of ingenuity and vision. A 98 square foot utility trailer. Utility trailers are not known for their cozy, quaint appeal. They're synonymous with construction sites and dirty work boots. However, the idyllic transformation cluttering the Pinterest feeds of non-traditional spaces, revamped into cute cottages like the one here, gave Curtis and Kelly hope. Granted, it's easy to see the sleek, multifunctional tiny homes on blogs and social media and get lured in by their sharp features. Curtis and Kelly knew better than to fall into a trap of fawning over non-essentials. First off, they established their primary needs in a living space: sleeping, food prep, storage. You may be thinking, why didn't they just get an RV? Well, Kelly and Curtis hated the idea of driving and living in the same space. Plus, the utility trailer was far cheaper. Before they put their hard hats on, they plotted out the dimensions of their pocket-sized house on the floor of their living room. Standing within the parameters of the 7 by 14 foot space, blocked with painter's tape and furniture, it was a tight squeeze. Even though they didn't need all the gadgets of fancier tiny houses, other homeowners on Pinterest, Instagram, and YouTube became the couple's best teachers. Every weekend for 9 months was devoted to rehabbing their portable space. Still, foregoing luxuries didn't make the project expense-free. Hands down, the priciest component in the process was a solar panel at $1,600, though a year's worth of electric bills made that amount seem like child's play. Tiny living came with sacrifices. Initially, a shower was incorporated into the design, but plumbing and limited space left them with no choice but to scrap that feature. After all, it wasn't just their space to consider. Joining Curtis and Kelly in their converted utility trailer were their dogs, Doug and Soy. Most of their time would be spent traveling and adventuring in the outdoors, but the pups deserved comfort too. The final tally for total expenses came down to $10,250. Factoring in the $1,500 cost of rent in Alaska, their plan to live off the land in their cozy makeshift abode for 14 months certainly resulted in savings. Admittedly, Curtis and Kelly weren't too fussed about the saving aspect of their new lifestyle. We weren't really doing it to save money. We were doing it to prove it could be done, that you could live minimally and follow your dream, said Curtis. June 1st, 2015 marked the start of their journey. Following winding roads with their home bobbing along behind their truck, they ticked off state after state, stopping at night to park and relax. One silver lining to a house on wheels: everywhere felt like home. To find places to stay at a low cost, Kelly scrolled through the website Harvest Hosts. Places with land to spare, like farms, breweries, wineries, and even folks with rolling backyards, offered up free space to book temporary visits. When Harvest Hosts proved dry in the area, they holed up in campgrounds, parking lots, and the driveways of kind acquaintances for the night, something that tested the boundaries of their comfort zones. Horror stories about talking to strangers are universally known, but hopping across the country makes it necessary. Kelly ripped off the Band-Aid and in doing so created lasting memories. It's so easy to say no and talk yourself into all the reasons why you shouldn't go to a stranger's house to eat a meal. Still, even your best friend and dogs can become too familiar when trapped in a small box for months on end. To avoid lashing out from tiny house fever, Kelly would suggest they stop what they're doing, grab their dogs, and take a giant gulp of the outdoors. Cousin Curtis jammed on his acoustic in 28 different states. But after over a year of the nomadic life, they were prepared to put an end to the tiny house chapter. Now it was Kelly's turn to invest in her dreams and use her degree. In the end, they just about made back their initial investment on the sale of their tiny home when they decided to sell. Painfully, they stripped the snug homey dwelling back down to a bare utility trailer. In the end, Curtis and Kelly valued tiny house living and would recommend it. It's going to be scary, it's not going to be pleasant all the time, but it's something that if you really feel you want to do it, you must. Otherwise, you're going to resent the decision not to try for the rest of your life. The idea of cutting costs with a mobile tiny house in order to travel is a popular one. Those stationary small dwellings save money in their own right and pack in cool features. Even the grandest homes are lacking. While it's true that no home is the same, one thing's for sure, everyone wants space. However, there's one movement that's allowing homeowners to cut back on their expenses without losing any of the amenities. It's all about tiny homes, and it's proving that small doesn't have to mean lack of luxury. In just 240 square feet, this tiny home, which hit the market at just $95,000, comes equipped with a full kitchen, full bath, washer-dryer combo, and a bedroom with enough space for a king-size mattress. It's also got a hidden dining room table that can sit up to 8 people. It might not look like much from the outside, but this house is packed with amenities. Its exterior is rustic and charming. It almost looks like a modern take on a woodcutter's cottage, and it fits in perfectly with the natural vistas that surround it. Some people don't like the idea of living in a tiny house because tiny means less space in which to live, store things, and entertain family and friends. But for this tiny home, that isn't a problem. For starters, it boasts a repurposed barn door that drops down into a deck. The house is designed to be easily mobile and adaptable to any terrain. This cozy abode is all about its surroundings, not just what happens inside of its doors, too. Though the interior is just as stunning. When you step inside of this tiny house, it's almost impossible to believe just how small it really is. Nothing about this space says cramped at all. In fact, the wood choices and the appliances used all give it a sense of air and space. Just imagine how great it would be to curl up in this chair, read a good book while looking out the glass door into such a vibrant backyard. And the best part is that everything is within reach. The natural light actually serves a couple of different functions here. Not only does it give the house a sense of being much bigger than it actually is, but it's also a great asset if you're the type of person who loves to grow their own plants. It's like a tiny greenhouse, too. Usually in tiny houses, space can be a bit of an issue, but this place is constructed with so many neat little nooks and crannies that you might actually have trouble filling up all the space you have. Not only is there plenty of space for planters and storage, but it's got a top-of-the-line, totally modern kitchen. Can you imagine how nice it would be to do the dishes and put away in their right place while looking out at that view? For those who spend a lot of time in the kitchen, sink space can be a real issue. It's either too small or it's wide but too shallow. This sink was inspired by those in traditional homesteads, so it's super deep and just the right size for cooks. Did we mention the dishwasher? Since there's not much prep and counter space for a drying rack, it helps to have an updated dishwasher on hand to get the job done efficiently and easily. The best part? You can use the dishwasher as extra storage. Can you imagine waking up every morning and seeing this? This is a dream kitchen with a place for both essential tools and luxury items. Just check out all those spice racks and cabinet space. Every single inch is utilized here. On the opposite end of the house sits the lofted bedroom space, which is accessed by a small ladder. Believe it or not, this nook can actually hold a king-size bed. You can also sit up once you're in there without hitting your head. Don't believe it? Just take a look. The bed takes up the entire space, so every inch is cozy and comfortable. A window lets in lots of light, and one wall includes shelves to store your favorite reads and items. The old-school light fixtures brighten up the loft too. Deciding to live in a tiny house doesn't have to mean giving up modern conveniences. Case in point, there's a built-in washer and dryer. You won't ever need to schlep to a laundromat again with this place. In tiny houses like this one, you have to think outside the box if you want to live in the way you're used to. For this home, that means you get a full bathtub and a toilet. The only downside, they're in the same room as your washer and dryer. Thankfully, there's a sliding door to the bathroom. Just get a load of that tub. Wouldn't it make you feel like $1,000,000 to take a nice bubble bath in there? The tiles mimic the old school subway tiles of New York City too, which gives the bathroom a vintage aesthetic. Well, it's perfectly easy to open up both doors, drop the deck, and let the sunshine stream through. You don't always need to be on display either. The original repurposed barn door provides plenty of security when you need it the most. Well, the house offers plenty of security. It's basically a welcome wagon on wheels. Imagine dropping the deck, breaking out the cooler, and sipping iced tea outside. You definitely become one of everyone's favorite neighbors.